are now tuned in to the Storm Tracker podcast.
Welcome back, family, to the Storm Tracker podcast. Marcus Benjamin here, representing for CanesCounty.com, part of the Rivals.com network. Make sure you subscribe to the website, CanesCounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30, and also subscribe to this podcast on all platforms, and also subscribe to this YouTube channel, live from Canes County. We're going into the third week of spring football, and it's just kind of rolling along here, and plenty of recruiting news on the recruiting trail. And freshmen continue to shine, but Carson Beck still not throwing for the Miami Hurricanes. So lots to talk about. And today I brought in my guy, Alex Donno, to really kind of discuss it all here on the Storm Tracker podcast. Thanks for joining me today, Alex.
It's always a pleasure, Marcus. And I can't emphasize enough to everyone out there that CanesCounty.com is such a great spot, especially this time of year, because I really start geeking out to the recruiting news. And, Marcus spends so much time talking to all these high school recruits. So many have been coming through campus. So if you want to keep up to date on all that stuff, CanesCounty.com is your spot.
I appreciate that, Alex. Yeah, the recruiting news keeps rolling in, and plenty that I still have to kind of roll out this week. So excited for this week, man. There's just a ton of stuff going on. We've got Pro Day today, which I'll be on my way soon to get down there. And then we've got practice, of course, 3 times this week. And then the Rivals camp is actually on Sunday. So it's really an exciting time of the year for Miami Hurricanes football. But you know what everybody kind of wants to talk about, man. Hey, people kind of want to know the depth chart, just who's going to start and who are going to be the backups and who are going to replace the guys from last year. And, you've been out there on practice a couple of times, Alex, when you kind of look at this roster up and down and see what you've seen from practice, are there any concerns for you when it comes to these position groups?
I think it's too early for me to use the word concern, but there are questions at certain spots, especially. And this was something that we asked when we, you and I and the rest of the media talked with Mario Cristobal on Saturday. There's been a lot of chatter about what's going on at receiver, and it's only because they lost pretty much everybody who produced last year, right? I mean, Josiah Trader, I think, was the top producing guy who returns on the roster this year, but didn't play a whole lot last year because, the top 4 receivers and the top tight end were so established with how much they played and rotated with one another last year that I think receiver is a big area. And the reason why, like I say, like I'm not concerned necessarily is that there's a lot of talent there in that receiver room. It's just a lot of unproven talent. We got a taste of what JoJo Trader, can do in the Pop-Tart Bowl when he had a big game, including a 40-yard touchdown reception that was an impressive, throw and catch from Cam Ward, his former quarterback. And as you see JoJo there, he's been good in practice, Marcus. He's a guy who's been making catches in practice consistently so far this spring. And Carr is another one who's played really well. And, one of the things that Mario Cristobal really emphasized on Saturday, and in my episode of Locked on Canes coming out later today, I'm going to emphasize this, is he doesn't want to oversell these guys yet when it's so early. And he also doesn't want them, getting caught up in all the positive headlines and tweets about them, because there's still a lot of work to do to build that sort of consistency with guys like JoJo Trader and Carr, because they have been flashing, but we're yet to see them do it on a consistent level. And, there's other talent there. We've talked about, Ray Joseph, who hopefully has a breakout year coming up, and Malachi Toney and Josh Moore, Dalen Upshaw, the true freshmen who seem to be doing well so far. Miami hasn't really had the luxury of CJ Daniels yet because he's banged up at the senior transfer out of LSU, who hopefully is a big part of that receiver rotation this year. But, there's a lot of guys who haven't had an opportunity to really step up here at Miami so far. So I would say that that's definitely an area to watch. And then you look at the defensive secondary, Marcus. I think that could probably go from what was a big concern last year to possibly being a strength this year, but it's going to be about communication and getting
Yeah.
all of these guys to play together, right? I mean, you've talked a lot, as have I, about Zechariah Poyser, the safety from
Yeah.
Jacksonville State, who's looking really good in practice. Xavier Lucas, transfer corner from Wisconsin, has looked good in practice, and Miami has talent returning this year like OJ Frederic and Damari Brown, who has been snake bit by injury last year. Hopefully he can be fully healthy this year. So there's definitely talent in that defensive secondary, a lot of new faces, but they've got to play together and improve from last year. And so there are certain areas where the depth is a little bit unproven, but I would venture to say, Marcus, that Miami probably has an overall deeper squad this year than they did a year ago.
Yeah, I would agree with you 100% on that. It's hard. It's going to be a hard job for Coach Zach Etheridge and Will Harris to really decide who are going to be the five guys that are going to start for the Miami Hurricanes against the opener against Notre Dame. So I wouldn't want to be those guys. So, and that's a great problem to have, especially with what we saw last season, where you could argue that the defensive backfield is the reason why this team did not make the playoffs last year. So to talk about that defensive backfield as a strength this season, based on what we saw and the talent that has come in through the transfer portal, is really great to know about this team. And I agree with you about the wide receivers as well. It's interesting position group just because you got a ton of young guys. But I tell you what, Donno, the best thing that I've heard this week is the fact that we heard about CJ Daniels being a leader on this team. Like I would think that was probably the best audio excerpt that we've kind of heard this week, that the fact that he's basically a leader kind of in that room, and that the guys have separate meetings with CJ Daniels, so that's really great to hear, because we haven't seen him on the spring practice field as of yet. He's recovering from an injury, but just to hear that is really positive, because they need that veteran presence, because there's a ton of young guys who I think are going to get a ton of playing time. Joshua Moore, from what I heard, really flashed during the scrimmage on Saturday. And, Malachi Tony seems to flash every practice, and Dalen Upshaw as well. So you've got those young guys along with Ray and JoJo. I still feel like maybe you want to add one more veteran wide receiver to this group to really solidify this, pass catching group. But from what I heard about, CJ Daniels being a leader, that's one of the more positive news that I've heard this week. But you got these receivers, and they're working with Emory Williams and Judd Anderson and Luke Nickel, who've all looked relatively solid during these spring practices. But the starter, of course, we all assume, is going to be Carson Beck. So you know as well as I do that you need kind of some reps with that guy. You need some continuity with him and the receivers. So is the fact that he hasn't really thrown yet to his receiving core. I mean, he's been out there, he's been out there participating in drills, just not throwing. Is that a cause for concern for you at all, Alex?
Yeah, it is. I'd be lying if I said it wasn't, because you think about where Miami was this time last year. You would have had not only a full 2 weeks, because it's not just spring practices, Marcus, as there were, off-season throwing sessions that, of course, Carson Beck, who hasn't been cleared to throw, has not been able to throw from January until now. Whereas at this time last year, you had Cam Ward, who got to Miami in mid to late January and had been throwing with his receivers, all throughout the month of March by this point. So, yeah, I mean, Miami's offense a year ago you would think way ahead of where it is right now, because you had your QB1, fully installing and getting to build chemistry with his receivers to that point. And this year you don't have that luxury, and it's not anybody's fault. I mean, it's not Carson Beck's fault he got injured, and Miami is rightfully so being very cautious with his recovery and clearing him to throw, but it definitely puts you behind the 8 ball. There's no question that there's going to have to be a lot of catching up that needs to be done between whenever he's cleared to throw, which is hopefully very soon, because honestly, it could be any week now, right? We don't know. He could get cleared tomorrow. He could get cleared 5-6 weeks from now. We don't exactly know when Beck is going to be cleared to throw. But whenever that day comes, there's going to be some catching up to do between then and August 30th when Miami takes on Notre Dame. Now, on the plus side, I'll say it's a concern that he can't throw yet, but I won't say it's a catastrophe because, thank goodness your QB1 is someone with loads of experience. I mean, I know obviously he is in a new place, a new offense, new teammates. So you have that. You have to build chemistry with these guys. But at the same time, it's not like Carson Beck is some, former backup or a freshman from somewhere. I mean, this guy was a full-time starter for the previous 2+ seasons at Georgia, right? I mean, one of the most, if not the most prominent college football program in the country. They're right up there. So, he understands, what it takes to play at the very highest level in the SEC. And he's got that experience and the working habits and the preparations that come with that. So once he is cleared to throw, you would imagine the learning curve is going to be a little bit quicker for him than it would be for some others. So that's the plus side, that if you're going to have to wait for your quarterback to get medically cleared, at least it's someone who has done it at the highest level.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Alex Donno, once again, joining me here on the Storm Tracker podcast. He hosts probably the best podcast in the game here, the Locked On Canes podcast. You can, view his episodes on YouTube and also on canescounty.com. Make sure you also check out his work on canescounty.com as well. He puts together a mailbag where you, the fans, can ask questions to my guy, Alex Donno. So we've talked about the offense. We've talked about, the wide receivers as well as the defensive backs. But the big question is this defense. I don't think we have a question about the offense anymore because, we assume that Carson Beck will not be Cam Ward, but, he will, this ship is not going to sink, because you have a Carson Beck that's coming in, like you said, with a ton of experience. And Shannon Dawson, the offensive coordinator, returns. And so you have that continuity. The offensive line, I don't think, is ever really going to fall off the way that they recruit. And with Alex Mirabal at the helm, and the tight end room is probably the deepest that it's ever been. Questions really is about this defense, obviously, because they changed basically all the coaches except for Jason Taylor, right? And that's the guy that you want to keep, of course. Got to keep the Hall of Famer on the coaching roster here. But now you've got a new DC in Corey Hetherman. He mainly focuses on the linebackers. I would say linebackers was probably somewhat of an issue, as well as the defensive backs of from last year. Do you believe in Hetherman, Donno? Do you believe that he will fix this defense and take this team to the next level, which would be a playoff berth?
I expect the defense to dramatically improve from last year, and I have every reason to expect that. I mean, first and foremost, if you're looking for somebody who has in the recent past been capable of seemingly waving a magic wand and improving a defense, Corey Hetherman just did that. Like, he just did that in Minnesota. He took Minnesota from 70th nationally in defense before he got there to, in his very first year, top 10 in every category, top 5 in some categories. So, sometimes refreshing a scheme and simplifying a scheme can be enough if you have the talent. And the thing is, Marcus, Miami to me has better talent overall than they had a year ago. I mean, I already talked about the defensive secondary and all the new faces, where there really has to be an emphasis on communication, because communication is somewhere that I think the defensive backfield failed last year, but they also didn't have the depth of talent. I believe they have more of that this year. And I think really where you're going to see a big time impact improving that defense is going to be up front. I feel that the more direct approach to pressuring quarterbacks is going to benefit the team this year. That's something when we spoke to Akeem Mesidor a couple of weeks ago, he's a big fan of Hetherman's defense and that more direct approach. I would imagine Ruben Bain is as well. He spoke on that too. And Bain is someone who, missed half the season with injury last year. I think he's going to have a bounce back this year. Ahmad Moten in the interior of the defensive line is someone who had a really good back nine of last season. He started to improve as the year went on. He has an opportunity perhaps to be a full-time starter this year. Maybe Justin Scott, who's entering his second season, who was a former 5-star recruit at defensive tackle. He has an opportunity to perhaps win a starting job. Same thing with David Blay, the big transfer from Louisiana Tech, who we had a chance to speak to on Saturday, who seems to be enjoying his time at Miami so far. I hope and expect the linebacker play is going to be better, especially with your defensive coordinator also being your linebackers coach. I do think linebacker is maybe a spot Miami can look to add one more in the transfer portal, but even if they don't, you expect guys like Wesley Basaint and Popo Aguirre and to be potentially starters, and Bobby Pruitt to be a key guy in the rotation who can make disruptions. So, and another thing when I talk about the defense, and I know for as much as the defense failed Miami last year, and Cristobal said it on Saturday, he said one side of the football, kind of let us down the stretch. So he was not shy about pointing that out. In addition to having seen, Corey Hetherman, transform the Minnesota defense in 1 year, I can remember a time when Miami's defense got transformed in 1 year. We all remember the Mark D'Onofrio era, which was pretty awful. Him and Al Golden together, and then going from the last year of D'Onofrio, which I think was like 2015, then going into 2016, which is the year that Manny Diaz, who we have thoughts about him as a head coach, but as a defensive coordinator, he was fantastic in Miami. Manny Diaz takes over with Mark Richt. First year, Miami's defense, Marcus, shaved 10 points per game off what they did the previous year. It went from about 28 points per game allowed under D'Onofrio to about 18 points per game allowed under Manny Diaz in 1 year. So sometimes a refresh of scheme, identity, and mentality can turn around a defense quickly. And I think Corey Hetherman can have that type of an effect here.
Yeah, I certainly hope so. Wesley Basaint, when I watched him, throughout his high school career, I was blown away by his speed, and I just hope that he kind of just takes that or takes his game to the next level and really kind of is more reactionary, than, maybe overthinking in his head and just goes, that's what I'm kind of hoping from Wesley, because, we're assuming he is going to be one of the starters on in that linebacking group. So that's what I really kind of want to see. I wanted to see these guys just play fast, but play under control too, because you don't want to over pursue. The last thing you want to see is, them in the like linebackers in the backfield, but, running backs and tight ends, going downfield. So, you kind of want to see them play fast, play just more with instincts, more with football instincts, and be reactionary than to overthink. And it seemed like they were just kind of overthinking last season. Miami's not overthinking when it comes to the 2026 recruiting class. This class is starting to build up, Donald, slowly but surely. I mean, led by, you could say one of the best quarterbacks in the entire nation in Darion Coleman. This kid just continues to flash. He performed well in OT7 over the weekend. And then they added Jalen Waters, who I am really high on, really outstanding defensive back out of Armwood. And then over the weekend, we get Javion Mallory committing to the Miami Hurricanes. Absolutely love this kid. His personality is just, outstanding. And he went through some adversity last year. So nice to see him also added to this 2026 class. I kind of, pointed out a couple of guys here that get me excited about the future of the Miami Hurricanes. What say you? What players for you, Alex, really get you excited in this 2026 recruiting class?
I also like the offensive lineman Ben Congdon because I get really excited when you land offensive linemen who are also really accomplished high school wrestlers because there's so much crossover when it comes to the toughness and the leverage that comes from wrestling, especially when you're a tall offensive lineman because you have to be able to get low when you block, and wrestling really helps you with that. So I think honestly, obviously there are certain sports that cross over. Like if you're a defensive back or a receiver, it's really good if you also run track, right? When you're an offensive lineman, it's really good when you wrestle. I think that's probably the best, crossover dual sport you can get. And it's why I hope Miami can land another high level wrestler on the offensive line and Ryan Merritt, who I know is someone Miami is after from Southridge, who just won a state championship. Just get me all the top wrestlers if they play offensive line. Get me all those guys. So I'm excited about Congdon for that reason. I'll talk about a couple of names you brought up. Darion Coleman. First of all, when you land your quarterback early in the cycle, which is what Miami did, it can allow them to become an ambassador, because I think your most important recruiters are your recruits themselves, especially your quarterback. Because what Darion Coleman has been doing in the camp circuits and the 7-on-7s. He's continues to raise his stock a lot of the same ways that Luke Nickel did last year. Luke Nickel was raising his stock the more he got through the recruiting process, which also shows you Shannon Dawson, who's the quarterback's coach in OC, excuse me, and the recruiting staff at Miami are doing a pretty good job kind of getting in early with their evals on some of these quarterbacks, and they tend to find the diamonds in the rough who rise through the process. And I really like Coleman, not only his arm talent, of course, but his demeanor. I like the fact that he worked out with Cam Ward about a week ago, so the former QB1 gets to pass along some of that knowledge and some of that swag to the next QB1. So Darion Coleman is someone who really gets me excited. And another one, you brought up Javion Mallory, who's the most recent recruit. He's a 4-star, so I'm not saying like he's totally underrated, but I think people are sleeping on Mallory a little bit because not only is Javion Mallory like a pretty big, powerful back, 5'11", 200 plus pounds, but he's also so well-rounded, Marcus. Accomplished receiver out of the backfield, which is kind of maybe a little bit of a dying skill these days, and is a true every down back. So, and I think Miami still might end up taking multiple running backs in the class of 2026, but Mallory is one who excites me. And as far as like the recruits, Miami obviously has, I think, 6-7 guys now in their class of 2026, but for the ones that we're still going after, the ones who really excite me most are probably the Chaminade Madonna duo of Jason Lopez at receiver and Derek Cooper at running back. I hope Miami can land both of those guys because I want to keep that Chaminade pipeline going, man. And if we can keep landing the top players out of that school, Miami's going to be in good shape down the road.
Yeah, absolutely. That is kind of the question now that they've added Mallory to the class. Like, will they take another back? Last year, they only added Gerard Pringle. So you assume that they would take another running back, especially Derek Cooper, who I still think that Miami is the leader right now for Cooper. So to add those two type of backs, I think Mallory's more kind of the bruiser type of back, and Cooper is more, I would say, an all-purpose back. That's actually how we have him classified on Rivals. So essentially, you are replacing, or essentially you could be replacing Jordan Lyle, who's more your all-purpose back, with a Derek Cooper, and then Mark Fletcher, who's more of your big bruiser, with a Javion Mallory. So it seems like, those are the guys waiting in the wings once, Lyle and Fletcher kind of move on. And then, pop in Gerard Pringle in there, and he is just lightning in a bottle, who's tough to bring down. For him to be a smaller back, this guy is really tough to bring down, and he kind of reminds me of, almost like a Christian McCaffrey as far as like his ability to just kind of do everything. So really excited for this running back room and the future with this 2026 class, which continues to build here, and I expect it to continue to build in the next upcoming months. That is going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Alex Donno once again joining me from the Locked On Canes podcast. Make sure you check out his stuff on canescounty.com. Thanks for joining me again, Alex.
Dude, it's my pleasure. And thanks, everyone, for supporting both of our work. You support Marcus, you support me, you support both of us at canescounty.com. It's a wonderful thing where we can collaborate.
Absolutely. Like I said, that's going to wrap it up for the Storm Tracker podcast. Make sure you subscribe to the website, canescounty.com, for free. Use the promo code Miami30. Also subscribe to this podcast on all platforms, and also this YouTube channel live from Canes County. Until the next episode.